Good morning. Welcome people who are watching online and those in our sites. Welcome to our summer short series, short stories that never wear out. I wish you had clothes like that. I bet that would be really good, wouldn't it? But it just doesn't matter whether you're joining us for the first time today, whether you've been tracking it through. These are like standalone stories in the Old Testament, in the first part of the Bible that actually maybe we don't hear about that often, but actually have a real message for us. And so today is no different, week 5 of our series. And just wondered, ever been in those situations where other people seem to have got things, but you haven't? Ever felt like the person who's like, everybody's got this, but why aren't I getting this? So I thought I'd share with you 3 things that I've never got to this day. The first one is this. Who knows what these are? Algebra, quadratic equations. When do you use this? When do you use this in Asda or when you go to other shopping supermarkets are available? But I have never understood this and I've never had to use it. Second thing is this. Who knows what this is? It is, but what is the process? Come on, chemists in the room. I know there's some of you here. Titration. Thank you at the back. If you don't know what titration is, neither do I. Even though I studied it for about 3 years, and basically you're supposed to look at this experiment and write down when the thing changes colour. And I would look at it and look at it and look at it, and it would change colour, and I'd write my answer, and every time the teacher would have a big red cross on it. Never got it, never understood it, don't even know what it's for. Okay, third thing is this. What are these? Who's ever seen a magic eye? Oh, put your hands down. It can't just, Russ had me with the screen like this going, can you not see that? I'm like, no, which is why it's in my talk. No, I don't know what it is. So I've never got them. But then there are some things in my life when I thought I wouldn't understand something, but then through the help of somebody else, it just dropped in. Like the scales were lifted from my eyes. And these are the 3 things that I want to share with you this morning. Learning to drive. Never thought I'd get that, and all of a sudden it just clicks, doesn't it? You know, changing gear, indicating, looking in the mirror. Interstellar. The film Interstellar, I finally kind of got about the 20th time I see it, and I still have to ask the question, what does that mean again when he's outside and he's pushing the books out? But I kind of get it. And the biggest one for me, the ultimate one for me, was getting to know Jesus. There was a moment in my life when it all made sense. Because sometimes we need a bit of help to see, don't we? And I'm not the only one. And I've realised that one thing that stops us seeing, or even accepting that what we're seeing is true, is all around this word pride. And we're going to go on a short little journey through the Old Testament today, through a story that most of us have been on. And it's almost like a fairy tale, this story. There's like a warrior who gets struck down by something terrible. And then there's this hero that comes from somebody that you wouldn't think would be a hero, but is. And then a mysterious man from the girl's homeland comes and makes a change. It's got kings and servants and even a river that's got the power to heal. Like, really sounds like a fairy tale, doesn't it? But it's got a real deep truth and a moral that I want to share with you today. So we're going to walk through this story together. We're going to take it apart a little bit and see what it teaches us about God and about ourselves. And this will be true whether you would call yourself a Jesus follower today or not. There is something in this story that has a truth, because there are moments when we are all faced with our pride. And how are we going to deal with it when it rears its head? But I want you to remember as we go through the story that we get to see the whole story. The guy we're working with only had the information he had at the time. Okay, so let's cut him a bit of grace and a bit of credit. So we're going to start back in 2 Kings, first part of the Bible, chapter 5, verse 1. It says this, now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded. Because through him, the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier. So Naaman is the protagonist in the story, okay? He's clearly a man who's used to being in control. He's a captain in the Syrian army, as we call it today, and he seems to have got it all going for him. You know, he's got position, he's got power, he's got favour with the king, he's got great military successes, his life is going great. He's got much of what this world would say that we want. Power, wealth, connection. But he was a leper. 5 words which changed everything about this man. And despite all his honor and his successes, Naaman suffers from this chronic illness which has no cure. Despite his wealth, despite his fame, his power, his obvious physical strength, Naaman doesn't have control over that disease. It has control over him. And he was one of the ultimate insiders that is about to become an absolute outsider. So, verse 2 says this. Now, bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. Here comes the most unlikeliest of heroes, this young captive girl from Israel. We don't know her name, but she's in so many ways the direct opposite of Naaman. She's young and helpless to change her own fate. She has zero control over her life, but this girl is an absolute hero. Why? Because she doesn't need to be in control. And second, she has a faith, a belief, and hope in her God. And because of this faith, she's not worried about how to gain control of her life, because she trusts that God is. And so she begins to show this incredible, somewhat to me, unbelievable compassion to those who have power over her. And so here we have this captive girl, just imagine the scene, this captive girl approaching Naaman's wife. And this is what she says. She said to her, "If only my master Naaman would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of this leprosy." I wonder what the conversation went like when Naaman's wife had to go to Naaman and tell him that. Ever had any conversations with your partners and you thought, I don't know how he's going to take this, but I've got to go for it? All the women are going, It's not an easy convo to have, is it? But the story doesn't let us in on that bit. But the truth is from that is, you know that God speaks to us through people we just don't want to hear from sometimes. Or maybe people we would least pay attention to or expect. And Naaman listens to the voice of someone who has no power except the power to make a connection. Connection between the resource she knew of and a man who needed help. She had the power of connection. So let's see where Naaman and maybe we go wrong a little bit. Firstly, the wrong person. Let's see how this happens. 2 Kings, next couple of verses. Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter I'm sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me." So Naaman, to his credit, listens to the girl. Maybe desperation had a bit of a hand in that, I don't know. But then he made a couple of mistakes. He went to the wrong place for help. He went for position. He went where he perceived the power to be, not where the power actually was. The king of Israel didn't have the power to heal him. And you know what? Wrong sources will not provide the right solution. But man, we give it a good go, don't we? He went to the wrong person. Then he paid the wrong price. If you remember that, it says that he took with him shekels of gold and 10 changes of clothing. That would have been an enormous amount of money in those days. It's like going, here's £500,000 and some shirts. But what we have to understand is clothing in those days was all handmade and very, very expensive. This would be party clothing with some bling, and I can't even believe I've just said that word. It sounds really bad coming out of my mouth, doesn't it? But Naaman went to the wrong person, and he was carrying the wrong price, and he had the wrong plan. Back to the story. When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots. Just think about that scene for a minute, pitching up outside your house. He turns up with all this money, with a letter. How could Elisha turn him down? He had a letter. Maybe Naaman would bribe him, or maybe he'd threaten him if he didn't do something. Naaman is showing us just how hard it is to give up control, especially when we think we have some control. But we will see that Elisha doesn't care about any of that. How can he help Naaman put his trust in the God that Naaman knows is going to cure him? So what does Elisha do? Elisha sends his mate out. Elisha sent a messenger to him. Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought he'd surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord, his God. Thought he'd wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So we turned and went off in a rage. Let's take a moment to look at what's happening here. Naaman has the wrong perception. Elisha sent a messenger out. That is like you think Leon's going to turn up at your house and you get me. That's exactly what it's like. Now, Elisha's house can't have been that big. We're not talking mansion here, just a small hut. And I reckon Naaman could see him in there, could see him through the window. But he sends out his mate. Just imagine being that person carrying that message out to that guy with all his chariots and his men. Sorry, but we can't see you today. As Naaman's staring into the house and can see him with his feet up. He's really busy. But he says, if you hike over to that river 15 miles away and you strip off and you dunk yourself in it, you'll be healed. Okay, better go. That's exactly what would have happened, exactly how I'd have done it. Of course Naaman doesn't understand, would you? He's furious. He's furious. He's furious because Elisha didn't put his legs down and come out to see him. He's furious because Elisha didn't wave his hand and do something magical over him. He's furious because Elisha didn't take his money. He can't be bought. And he's furious because Elisha wants Naaman to go and wash himself in that dirty little canal called the Jordan rather than one of the big, impressive rivers in his own land. Naaman went to the wrong person with the wrong price, with the wrong plan, and totally the wrong perception. I thought that for me he'd come. Have we ever found ourselves thinking things like that? I thought for me, you'd do that. I thought for me, that would happen. I thought for me, that would be the outcome. Naaman didn't like the instructions he received. He didn't like the solution he was told. He didn't like to do something that he thought would take a bit of effort. And before we're too harsh on him, these are things that we do. The I thought attitude. I thought another answer would be given. I thought we'd do it another way. Or how about expecting more attitude? Why wasn't there some type of special ceremony? Why wasn't I honoured in some way? Why wasn't it something greater? Actually, something greater was there. He couldn't see it. I want to do something else. Anything but that. Please let me do something else. He wanted to substitute a river in Syria for the Jordan River. And we have the privilege today of reading about how special that river was in the history of Israel. But back then, it was a dirty little canal creek even to Naaman. How could this heal him? Do you know there's never a right way to do a wrong thing? There is never a right way to do a wrong thing. And Naaman got angry, but here's the thing. In his anger, he was still a leper. He was still a leper. He was the meatloaf of the Old Testament. I would do anything for healing, but I won't do that. Thank you. Thank you very much. If you all go bombs now, I'm taking that as a plus. Naaman had control issues. Naaman had pride issues. He was used to telling others what to do and getting his own way. But this was one thing over which he had no control. You know what the biggest tragedy of this story would be? If Naaman had turned round and gone home and been almost persuaded. Almost persuaded. If he'd gone home and said to his wife, you know what, I nearly did what he said. I nearly went and dunked myself. He would just have returned home. He'd have gone home with leprosy and he would have died. And I really think somebody needs to hear this today. Nothing great really happens until we take the plunge. Nothing great can really happen unless you take the plunge. And he did do some things right. He understood he had a serious problem and he knew he needed a cure. He understood that belief was not enough. He believed somebody could cure him. He knew he had to do something. So what happens? Naaman's servants went to him and said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and he became clean like that of a young boy. The servant points out what Naaman wouldn't see or what Naaman couldn't see. In other words, get over yourself. Can you get over yourself? What have you got to lose except your pride? What makes a good friend? I've realised what makes a good friend is this. Someone who will tell you the last 10% of something you may not want to hear. And loads of times I get caught up in stuff and you will get caught up in stuff when we think we can see clearly but we really can't. And a good friend helps us to see things as they really are. They turn the light bulb on. And all of us need a relationship with someone who has permission to turn on the light bulb we've missed. Could Elisha have come out of his house and prayed for Naaman? Of course he could. So why didn't he? Elisha is saying, Naaman, if I come out and I pray for you, you get your healing right now, it won't help you. You've come with your massive money and your shirts and a power that few people could pull together. But I don't want that. And God doesn't need that. Because what you need, Naaman, is the God moment. You need the supernatural change where you need it to happen. And it may look external, but I'm telling you, Naaman, what you need is on the inside. You've just got to get down from your high horse first. And let's give Naaman a bit of credit. Because let's just think about what Elisha was asking him to do. To get into that water, what would he have had to have done? Take off his armor, remove his tunic, and reveal his disease that maybe people didn't know about, or maybe nobody had seen before. He had to make himself vulnerable. He had covered up his weaknesses so well, now he would have to lay it all to one side. And in becoming vulnerable, we find healing. And the Bible says he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times. And that word dip is the word tabal, and it means immerse, plunge. He didn't just go in and splash it all about a little bit and try just give a bit of a sprinkling. Naaman had to immerse himself into that water, in that dirty water, in that creek he didn't think much about. It was like a baptism for him. He has to humble himself, submit to the cure, and allow himself to be changed by it. And I've got a bit of an equation for you. Ability plus opportunity equals responsibility. Does Naaman have the ability to do what's being asked of him? Yes. Does Naaman have the opportunity to do what's being asked of him? Yes. Then Naaman has the responsibility to respond to what is being asked of him. That's his alone. And that's true for us too, whether we're Jesus followers or not today, whether we call ourselves Christians or not. If there's an opportunity and we have the ability, the choice to respond always stays with us. But let's look at the result. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant." Now, if I was meeting Elisha for the first time and he just saved my life, what would I say? Thank you. Not a mention of the word leprosy there. Naaman didn't know he was looking for God. He was looking for a cure. But God used his search for a cure to lead him to something even better than the cure. Along with a dramatic change on the outside, there was a dramatic change on the inside. And the point of this story is not that every leper who heads out to the Jordan River will find healing for their leprosy. The point of this story is to show you and me how we find God, or better yet, how God finds us. And our last verse for today, the end of the story. The prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. A fabulously rich guy wants to give Naaman a shed load of money, and he refuses. Because Elisha knows that to have anything from Naaman would confuse the whole situation. Remember, Naaman had started this whole story thinking that he could purchase his healing with what? His money and his clothes and his power and his status. And if Elisha had ended up accepting that gift, even in thanks, it might still lead people to assume that he had been able to buy it. And the one thing I want you to understand today from this story is this, that a gift from God is a free gift of grace. And this story is such a simple story, but it has a profound truth. The biggest of which are for Naaman to be cured, Naaman had to change his thinking, be willing not to do things the way he thought they would go, but God's way, even though it didn't make sense to him, even though it didn't make any sense to him. He had to get down from his high horse, literally get down, be willing to step over his pride and maybe have it dented a little. He had to shed himself of everything that to the external world would show his position, would show his status, would show his power, his control, and humble himself so that what was needed internally could be met. You see, humility can save your life, literally in Naaman's case. Humility can save your life. And I want to ask you as we finish today, what do you need God to do for you today? Maybe we need to be willing to put aside our pride to allow God to work. Can I just say, don't be too proud to ask for help. You know, if I'm honest, and if we're honest, there are times in my life when I think God is making a mistake. When I think, you know what, he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know what I know. You know, if only God had asked for my advice. There's a pastor called Tim Keller who was in New York, and he said this: God answers prayers the way we would if we knew what he knew. I love that. God answers prayers the way we would if we knew what he knew. Our job, our call, is to give God the opportunity to intervene. And you could say, but I've tried this before, Jayne. You don't know what I'm wrestling with. Do you know what? I don't know what Naaman felt that fourth, fifth, sixth time. He absolutely submerged himself in that water and he came up and he saw his body and it was no different. But on that seventh time, everything changed for him. Maybe you've never asked God for anything. Or maybe you don't even know what you think about God today. But when Naaman went into that river, he came out with much more than his leprosy gone. In that moment of humbleness, in that moment of absolute vulnerability, God fully revealed himself and a relationship was born. A relationship was born. And we have an opportunity for that to happen this morning. You know, Naaman's story reminds me of somebody else that shed everything, that would have told us what his position and his power and his status would have been. But you know, different to Naaman, he didn't have to push his pride to one side. He didn't have to step over himself. He didn't have to worry about his control issues to reveal his humbleness. He chose. He chose to do that for us so that we could have that very relationship that Naaman found in that dirty river. And we're going to take communion today together as a way of valuing this story, but also valuing what Jesus has done for us. Because in Philippians it says this, in that Jesus made himself nothing. Jesus made himself nothing. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, what's it there for? It's therefore because of what Jesus had done prior to that. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place, giving him the name above every name, that at his name, as we've sung today, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. What an exchange. What an exchange happened. And you know what? Communion is a place where we can not only celebrate the ongoing meaning of that exchange, but we can experience that for ourselves today, the power of it. And I want to ask us as we come to take communion together, is there something we need to get off our high horse about? Is there something that our pride we need to push to one side? Is there something that maybe God is asking us to become vulnerable to him about? Has God been asking us to do something and our pride just won't let us do it? Is there somewhere we need to make room? Maybe for God to start to break down those walls that we have put up for whatever the reason is today. And I want to invite you to come and exchange that. Be willing for God to intervene. As we take communion together from stations around the room, let's make room for whatever God wants to do. And you know what, like Naaman, we may experience more than we were expecting. So I just want to ask us to stand if we could, and I'm just going to pray. And I'm going to invite you when you feel ready, and it's an invitation to anybody in the room and online and in our sites and in Clibbery this afternoon, to come and think about that moment of exchange when Jesus humbled himself so that we can have the relationship we're celebrating today. Father, we want to thank you for Jesus. We want to thank you for what he did. We want to thank you that he put aside his position, his status, his name, his power, so that we could know you in this moment right now. And God, if we're battling right now with something about our pride, where you're asking us to do something or be something and we just won't do it because it'll be a dent to our pride, Father, would you help us come to this table today and exchange that for your humbleness and your vulnerability. We lay aside our pride. We lay aside our I thought attitude, and can't we do something else? Or I thought it would be, or I don't want to do it this way. To give you a moment to intervene, because where we have ability and opportunity, the responsibility to respond is mine. And if we don't have that today, then God, as we take communion, I pray that we'd celebrate again the glory and the power and the surety in that relationship we have with you. Come bless us as we take communion now together in Jesus' name. Amen.